I think the core is, how do you embody love and care? Do you listen well? What does your, body language say? How do you respond? And do we respond the way Jesus first responded to us in our crisis?
Hello and welcome to The Way Home, a podcast by Rockford Rescue Mission. I'm Nathan Haglin.
And I'm Jim Killam.
Yeah, so this is new. This is, not something we've done before, for at least for a long time.
Surprisingly, it's not brand new because Rockford Rescue Mission it wasn't a podcast because they didn't exist yet, but they did a radio show back in the late 90s, very early 2000s. And it was an interview show, kind of like this is going to be, but a half-hour show on local radio.
Yeah, I looked up a bit of the history of podcasts here since, it's, we're starting one, so I should figure, where are we going
We got to sound smart as we come out of the gate here.
This is the first one. Podcasts have been around since the 80s, but oddly enough, they haven't really caught up with technology up until when, and the idea of posting content without downloading the file itself was very new. 2004 was technically the first podcast that you could stream. And that was after I was born. So podcasts are younger than I am. So
yeah, I had an early iPod back in the 2000s, and I remember I had a 45-minute commute to work at that point. So I listened to a lot of podcast material early on, really before it caught on, I think, because then there were a few years you didn't hear much about it, and suddenly it exploded.
Yeah,
I think probably as radio declined and as there was just so much more content available, and it became obvious that anybody could basically have their own show if they wanted to.
Yeah, and recording equipment became cheaper and all that, and that's actually how it got its name. Was iPod and broadcasting was the combination of those two. So for our interview today, we are interviewing our homeless services director, Kurt Pazdra. And Kurt, he's fairly new to the team, but he focuses so much on pouring into the staff that he oversees and just the guests and residents just here at the mission.
Yeah, I think you'll find as you listen to this that you may not work at the rescue mission, you may have never set foot here, but there is going to be content here that you may find useful in your own life, just in the way you see other people and see ministry opportunities.
Yeah, and I think it's that intersection because between faith and your workplace, even in a ministry environment, and we're continually learning and growing, and we're imperfect people trying to show people, the gospel as we work and just, giving them a hand up on life.
Here then is our interview with Kurt Pazdra. Well, Kurt, thanks for taking time today. I know you're running many different directions in several roles here, but we'd love to value your time by having you tell us a little bit about your roles here, first of all, and then we can find out kind of how you ended up coming to work at the mission, things like that.
Sure. Well, why don't I start at the beginning of the story, right? Yeah. So I started at the mission last October, so beginning of this fiscal year. I was hired to be our homeless services director. At present, I'm directing homeless services and life recovery. I have a background in pastoral ministry, and for about 7 years, some of it part-time, some of it full-time, that's the field I was in. I actually got connected to the mission when in my last role as a youth pastor. I set up a youth trip, but we invited a multi-generational group from our church to come and serve for a weekend, wrapping up with the chapel program that Charmel leads, where the church hosts the dinner and the message. And I had so much fun that weekend, and it left a good impression on me about the mission. So it came around time to apply, through an application here, a few applications there. And just with prayer and my wife's support, it became clear near the end of that job hunt process, all signs for me were pointing to the mission.
So one of your roles here is homeless services director, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Can you describe what you do?
Yeah. So we have two departments in our homeless services ministry. There's our men's crisis center and our women's crisis center. Men's center, it's shelter as well as it's meeting essential needs throughout the day. The women's shelter, same thing. It's for women and their children. We call our clients our guests. We want to treat them with hospitality, and we are advocating for them as they seek to do whatever they can to move forward in life, get a leg up in society. And of course, we're bringing the ministry of Jesus and his gospel into it. We want everyone here to know who he is, hopefully be a believer, and then also we want to provide generously the same way God always provides generously to anyone. And so my role is primarily ministering to the staff. I meet regularly with our supervisors as to check in on how operations are going. Are we compliant with our policies and procedures? But there's also a visional piece, filling the staff's cup, giving some pastoral direction.
Yeah, you mentioned the staff care element of this, which I know is huge here because this work can be all-consuming and it can be exhausting, and there are victories, but there are also defeats, right? And
absolutely,
you're dealing with all of that on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's amazing, even just a word of encouragement or stopping someone to pray. For example, today, we had 2 people scheduled for the day shift in the men's center. One is homesick. He's been homesick for a good portion of the week. His doctor told him, you need to rest. Okay. So today I pulled the other guy aside. He was about to escort our men back to the day room from the dining hall, the great room. And he just looked in a rush. So I stopped him and I said, look, I see what you're doing all week. No, I'm always grateful for you, but this week you've done more than double your share. Thank you. And it's even moments like that you want to fill their cup because you get attached to the guests. You should. And you're caring for them genuinely. And you rejoice with them when they get that housing or they get that job. You get sad when something happens, whether it was a foolish decision someone made or they were waiting on someone, they didn't get accepted for the job, whatever it is. And they're back to square one. You could feel the defeat. You could feel the joy. So there's a lot of ups and downs, and you're on the whole time you're here. So the staff definitely need their cup filled.
Just for the benefit of people who don't know the mission very well, how many people are we talking about on a daily basis in the crisis centers?
Yeah, well, at present, we have 60 beds available in each center. So we're looking at 120. And that's not including our residents and life recovery program. Right. But if you just look at the shelters, anywhere from around 60 to 70. I mean, especially during the cold months, we will allow emergency shelter that goes above our census for our bunks, but typically we have to stay at census. And so, and that's not including visitors during the day.
So you're saying there's not many open beds each night?
No, typically we're full. It varies, there's different flows in the month where actually you could track it. Basically, whenever guests have who are on the Link program in the city get their Link card recharged, they're excited to book a hotel, and then they're back a week later. So there's flows you can track, but typically we're at max capacity.
And with 60, up to 60 in each center, that's 60 stories, isn't it? I mean, nobody's story is exactly the same, but what kind of things do you see on a daily basis in terms of people coming in?
So on a daily basis, well, homelessness, poverty. There's interesting articles that are being written and are published in our magazine for our partner, Citygate, but the mental health epidemic is on a rise, and it's always becoming more complex. So there's an intersection between poverty, mental health, being in constant survival mode. This is more in our women's shelter, but we often hear stories of domestic abuse and seeking asylum from that. And on occasion, you will just run into someone who their life was very healthy and suddenly something happened, they hit rock bottom, and they're brand new to this, experience of being homeless. I mean, typically after 2 years of chronic homelessness, statistically, you've developed complex PTSD, and that could be co-diagnosed with other diagnoses. We do have the occasional individual who something just happened, they lost their job, and they're not in that state of crisis yet, but they knew to go somewhere to get help.
So you're often seeing people, if it's not the low point of their life, it's a low point.
It's, either rock bottom or somewhere on the journey there.
And there's a special kind of care for people in that those situations, isn't there, where it's not one size fits all?
Correct. Yeah, it requires listening well, getting to know someone's story, getting to know their needs, helping them create goals for themselves, because then they could take ownership of it, and then connecting them to whatever resources we have in-house and with our community partners to help them get a leg back up in society. I mean, that's the basics of every day, not to mention bringing them the hope of the gospel. Because with that relationship with Jesus, there's more security in God's love, there's more power from his Spirit, there's direct access to the throne of grace, and now you're talking the power of God and the power of all these resources around you. And there's more hope in that than just setting some goals but not having a sense of security of, in the big picture, is my life going to be okay?
You talked about the mental health aspect of all this too, and how, a high percentage of people who come in our doors have something going on. That's sort of a blanket term, mental health. What specifically do you see?
I mean, well,
I'm not criticizing your term. I'm just saying that's how it's usually
it is a blanket.
Yeah.
It is a blanket term. So we'll see everything from schizophrenic behaviors to obsessive compulsive behaviors, anger issues, sometimes clear signs of social anxiety. At times it could be forgetfulness. Sometimes it's even a lot of acute stress in your life. Your brain just stops processing in a way that is conducive towards keeping a schedule, remembering all your appointments, remembering that last conversation. And in that case, you have to have a lot of grace, be very flexible to adapt to how this individual has their own relationship with time and people and life needs, basic skill. Like your relationship with everything can be so unique based on how much trauma you've been through. So it really takes an art of just connecting and setting realistic goals.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were saying that, with people who have been living on the street, they really have been living in their own heads for a lot of the time, and they aren't connecting with people. And so even just to have a conversation is a challenge at first.
Yeah, no, it can be. And we run into that a good amount.
The word hospitality gets tossed around, again, maybe like mental health in a way, but with hospitality here, did anything surprise you when you came in terms of the way that ministry happens here and what some of the needs are?
Well, I'd like to start with the big picture and then apply it to the mission.
Yeah.
So when I think of hospitality from a Christian perspective, you hear the word hospital in there. I mean, the early church eventually developed what became hospitals. So it's this idea of, you see someone in crisis or in their misery and brokenness, in the messiness of just life on earth, things break, things get messy, and you care for someone where they're at, and you care for them enough not to leave them where you found them, but to help them get to a better place. I mean, a hospital is that for physical ailments and at times mental health, of course. So how do you do that for all of life? I mean, that's the question. And I believe God sets the example for us in that Christ leaves, if you will, the penthouse of heaven for the ghetto called earth. and he says, look, I am not going to push you away. I actually want to embrace the mess of earth because I want to heal it. And in his death, in his resurrection, in this life we receive, now there is power and hope and direction from a place of security with God. So he moves towards the need. He stays with the need until the job is done and it's healed. And he equips those who follow him to be able to now turn around and be vessels of that same care for others. He sends people to be agents of that healing. So there's the big picture. Okay, let's try to zoom in on just how many square feet we have here on the city block called Rockford Rescue Mission. So here's what we aim to do. Now, of course, we are imperfect people. We have a lot going on. But here's what we aim to do anytime a guest comes through our doors. Greet them kindly. Help them settle in. If they look nervous, just do what you can with your voice, with your presence, with your body language. Maybe give them a bottle of water. Help them settle down. Explain to them that there's an intake process. We have to do some paperwork. We'll make it as quick as we can. But what we're going to do is get you cleaned up, depending on the time of the day, cleaned up, get fed, get you to bed as soon as possible. And then we do walk them through some expectations and house rules, because if you're going to live here with everyone else who's also in crisis, and keep in mind the mental health component, we want to make sure we have some guidance so everyone can have a healthy stay together. So from there, it's, okay, walking people through with grace first, because not everyone's going to get it right away, what the daily expectations are. Meeting with your advocate, setting some goals. Okay, where do I want to be in life? How do I get out of the mission and get there? What are practical steps I can take? And all throughout that, we also are praying. We have chapel services. Our chaplain, Pastor Ron, love that guy. He does his Bible studies. We'll have classes available in our work center, sometimes afternoon activities to help them relax or work on a hobby, those sort of things. And it's all of life. I mean, it's every component of life, your mental experience, your embodied experience, your relationships, the spiritual life we have. We're trying to create an environment where it's a place where you will heal in time and you will feel encouraged to take ownership, to get your life back into your own hands, but really with God's help and God's sovereignty. I mean, that's what we're looking to do. I just named a lot of things we do, but I think the core is, how do you embody love and care? Do you listen well? What does your body language say? Do you have patience when someone's really struggling or there's some anger episode? Like, how do you respond? And do we respond the way Jesus first responded to us in our crisis?
And all of that would be, for, I would guess, most of the people coming in, very unfamiliar. They're not used to being treated with that level of care and respect, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because a good number of our guests have been in and out of prison. Mm-hmm. And you go into an environment with a set shower time, a set curfew, a set bedtime. You're moving them from activity to activity. In their mind, they're reliving prison at first. So you have to make an extra effort to handle with care, to treat with respect and dignity, because even if you're doing your best not to be the warden, they're going to imagine you as the warden. And sometimes if things get out of hand, you do have to enforce discipline. So then in their mind, well, you're right back there. So there is a level of intentional care, deliberate care you have to take to try to mitigate that experience.
I wanted to ask you about that too, because I know there are times when things go a little off the rails with somebody and you may have to evict somebody or tell them they can't come in or something, but how do you handle those situations where a person may be belligerent or even dangerous?
That's a good question. So we do have it's like a little card that's easy to read. It's a set infraction guide for our staff, because let's face it, we're imperfect. And if you are really, you're trying to de-escalate a tense situation, but at times to no avail, you yourself can start to get escalated, if you will. So we have to have guidelines just so that the discipline we enact seems reasonable or fair to whatever the, if you will, the offense was.
And the residents and guests are aware of those too?
Yeah, actually during the intake process, they have to review, here are the house rules and here are some of the possible ranges of discipline that can happen. There's an agreement to that. So what it looks like typically though is leading with grace. Try to have a coaching conversation, give them a second chance. I have been in conversations with other ministry leaders who say, I think sometimes you give too much grace. And that's a matter of opinion, but we are trying to meet people where they're at and have an understanding, have compassion. But eventually, if there's repeated incidents where a particular house rule is being broken that we've been talking about, if it's causing a lot of disturbance or even perceived danger for others, talk about trauma, it could be re-triggered. So if other guests are reliving their trauma because someone goes AWOL, eventually we have to step in and say, no, we're going to be a little more firm so this can stop. And depending on the severity, it could be for one night, we're saying you're not allowed back in, but you could check back in the next day. At its greatest extent, we will go up to a year, just depending on how severe the situation was. But we hold that with reservation. And we always want to look towards having conversations. Let's say someone is supposed to be gone for 2 weeks because of what they did, but they show up 10 days later. Can you please let me back in? We will have a conversation and try to evaluate, have they learned from this experience? Do they seem a little more stable? Is there a change of heart? Because we want to work with them. We never want to just punish aimlessly. In fact, we don't even think of it as punishment or the staff exiting guests. Guests exit themselves if after a length of conversation and second chances, there just isn't the change that's needed so the environment's healthy for everyone we're serving.
So in order to get to know our guests a bit better, we got what we'll call our top 3 here, just 3 random questions.
Okay.
And we'll get to, ask our guests here. And Kurt, what is a favorite quote of yours?
Okay, well, I have it pulled up here, and I warned you my background's pastoral ministry. So I actually have a love-hate with this quote that could drift into a sermon, but I'll try to keep it brief. So at one point, a friend of mine in high school threw this quote out, and it stuck with me, and it is one of my favorites. So I'm a Bears fan. Unfortunately, this is from Vince Lombardi. However, it says, "Gentlemen, we will chase perfection, and we will chase it relentlessly, knowing all the while we can never attain it. But along the way, we shall catch excellence." So I'm always pretty driven in type A. At times, people on my staff will ask, "Are you okay?" Yeah, I'm okay. "Are you sure you don't want to slow down?" "Oh, right, okay." I can struggle with perfectionism, but what I love about this quote is it concludes saying the real goal is to catch excellence. And it reminds me one thing that helped me be healthier for ministry. It was one little phrase in Paul's first letter on record to Timothy that we've named 1 Timothy, where he's talking about setting a good example for the congregation he's leading. And he says, it's this one little phrase, "Let them see your progress." He doesn't say be perfect. He doesn't say pretend you are Jesus. He says, let them see your progress. And that's shortly after he tells them, don't let them judge you because of your youthfulness. So if the leader's goal is not to be perfect, have all the answers, but to actually be an example of the gospel in real time, you are in progress, you are healing, you are growing, you are maturing. Well, I like that. I also like Vince Lombardi, probably in the locker room, I'm guessing, like throwing the helmet, throwing the clipboard, getting in their face, but because he wants them to reach excellence, not perfection. But if you set your goals high, if you dream big and set steps towards those goals, you could settle probably for something good. It's like, the A+, but you get the B+, that kind of thing. Or hopefully the A-.
Yeah, and you said you weren't going to preach, but...
But I did, so there you go.
If you could teach a class on anything, any subject, any, environment, what could you teach a class on with no preparation?
Yeah, well, so I've had the privilege of teaching different classes here and also in church world. Any subject, I really like the intersection between film, literature, music, and scripture. Whether that's how do we see like a parable for the gospel in this song, or don't see it, and let's talk about that. How can you talk to your neighbor about that, or build bridges for the gospel? But also, sometimes you study other forms or mediums of communication. You recognize, the Bible has a lot of different genres inside it. It's not all law or dictation. And so with that, I think there's a lot of cool opportunity in exploring scripture and art together to have a more fuller, like head and heart understanding of what God is saying. And at times, even through common grace, what God might be saying through other voices in the world. I mean, it's not scripture, but it does sometimes. There's a quote, all truth is God's truth. Yep. You will see that.
Top leadership tip off the top of your head.
Ask good reflective questions.
So what does that mean?
So
is that your reflective?
What you just did? Yeah. You're leading me. Look at that. It's so easy for the leader in the moment, especially when they see something that they perceive as wrong, to jump in and be, I have the solution. But now you can be micromanaging. And it's important for the leader to know the why behind the what, communicate the what, share the why as much as is appropriate to get buy-in, but empower the staff to do the how. Don't do everything for them. So, how will you do this? What is your goal? Like, these are just examples, but if you've defined the why and the what, and they caught the vision, Now just ask questions that coach them towards finding the answers in themselves. Don't take over. And it's so easy. It's like, oh, you're supposed to do this. No. Ask a reflective question. Let them draw it out themselves.
We were talking about culture a little bit, and maybe that is a segue into what do you see in Rockford as spiritual needs, and how do you experience that here at the mission?
So it's interesting you should phrase it spiritual needs, because we do have a lot of community partners who are trying to meet the relational, mental, physical, emotional needs.
Yeah, all very real.
All very real. And there is a tendency in church world to hyper separate the spiritual from the material. But really it's all one human being and it's all one creation. And so I do see those things as intersecting. And really it's how do you find God as your all in all who provides all those things. But in the community, in terms of spiritual needs, we actually have a lot of churches in the area. What I see, though, and it's something my heart's passionate about, is there are so many church attenders, but aside from a handful of church programs, non-for-profits, the mission included, we don't always see believers just out doing the outreach that we would love to see. I'm grateful for volunteers. I'm grateful for donors. I'm grateful for churches that partner or do their own unique grassroots things. But the spiritual need that I see is for believers to get a little more uncomfortable. Because we know about the material needs. But if we can only see how much God cares about the whole picture, and we carry with us the words of life, to enter into the entire array of human need with the source of hope, wow. So when I hear need, I'm like, I need to see more Christians spurring each other on to get their feet and their hands a little dirty, to be a little less comfortable, and to see how much more God can do. I think sometimes we see roadblocks when we look at our own abilities or we have our anxieties about getting out of our comfort zone. But Jesus took his disciples into a boat, set a storm over them, and took a nap. And then they wake him up, and he basically asks, I'm paraphrasing, but where was your faith? And then after he calms the storm, the text says, in Luke's gospel at least, then they became afraid. So you thought they were afraid? They were afraid when they realized, oh, the one who has the authority over all this actually let this happen, and we were okay the whole time. And they were afraid of who he is. So the spiritual need I see, in summary, is for believers to be okay to not be okay, to not be comfortable, to be okay to take risks and see what the Lord can do when we share our life and our resources and the gospel with those around us.
So let's take that a little farther, this idea of putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. Certainly, working at the mission is largely uncomfortable.
It is.
What do you do to prepare yourself for that spiritually, whatever it may look like? Because I think whether people are working here or anywhere, there's some value in thinking about preparation, right?
Of course. Well, on my car rides in, I pray. And I pray over myself. I pray over my supervisor, my supervisees, their staff. I invite God to just tell us what we need to know for today. Lead us in your spirit. Lead us in your truth. I pray that typically you'd think if you're praying the armor of God, you're praying it over yourself. But I ask that they would get armor too, and the Lord could figure out how that works. And I do pray over some key areas where I know here's our goals, here's our vision, but we fall short because we're not perfect. And I just pray that God would help us fill those gaps. And I do pray over our guests and our residents for growth, for salvation. And so really it's about being with the Lord in it, but having a mindset so that when you step out, you're fearless. Head first fearless, to quote Taylor Swift.
And then
it's not your favorite quote.
Cultural connection.
That actually is my favorite quote.
All right, so we'll edit that. And your favorite quote is now Taylor Swift.
Okay.
What's something maybe you've learned that surprised you since you've worked here?
Since I've worked here? Well, I've been surprised by how much I can endure in terms of it's a fast pace here, especially when you're in leadership.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's job here is busy, and you're on all the time because you're in ministry mode, you're in relationship mode. But then the leadership definitely experiences a double dose of you're running fast. And I've been surprised to learn how much I can endure, but also how much grace God has when a few things just fall through the cracks, because inevitably they will.
Sure.
And I've been also surprised to see, well, you have to have a sense of humor at times to endure some of what you see in a day. So I've been surprised how comfortable I can get with messiness. But I think having a sense of humor is part of God's way of helping you cope at times. But yeah, just you can be comfortable in the Lord's presence in the midst of messiness. And you don't, it's counterintuitive, but it's real.
Yeah. So in finishing up for today, what has been some of the impact that you've seen on our guests and residents on when you show that hospitality and that love effectively? What's been some of those good stories there?
Well, when someone gets a second chance or they're treated better than they think they deserve, you see them go from a tense posture, a defensive posture to just relaxed, open, maybe smiling, from like fearful to peaceful. Here's another example. Just earlier this week, I had a great day. I decided in the morning to visit both shelters, connect with the staff a bit. And when I go to the women's shelter, our supervisor, Leona, and one of our staff members were dancing with this mom and her child, and they were celebrating that they just got housing. I mean, they were waiting for, several days. They're on the wait list. Then I go to the men's shelter and I meet a guy for the first time. He came 2 weeks ago, but I haven't had the chance to meet him yet. And Tony, one of our coordinators, or actually one of our advocates, he introduces me to him. I shake his hand. The guy looks a little timid, like, who's this random dude who just walked in? And Tony's like, he's cool. He's cool. Okay, so we start talking. We talk about his goals. Turns out he's only been here 2 weeks. And he's like, in the upcoming weeks, I have these meetings lined up. I'm going to talk to some people. I should be on my way out of here. Some guests take a while, but he was on it. Tony was working well with him. And I saw confidence in that man. I saw joy in the mom and her daughter. And that's the result of hospitality. That's the result of giving people a chance, welcoming them in, and giving them the time and assistance needed for them to reach the goals they want to reach. Like, are you in their corner to support them as they do the work? And I was just so happy. It was a great start to this month and this quarter for me.
It's interesting what you said about picking up on body language too, is that you're not always going to hear those results out of the mouth of somebody, but you may pick it up, and I'm sure you learn this over time, how to perceive that someone's doing better.
Yeah. And sometimes we will hear testimonies. Like, for example, there are some women in our shelter who went through the shelter program, they've been housed, and they've reached their goals. Weeks or months later, they visit just to tell Miss Leona, our supervisor, when I first came here, I didn't like you. I thought you were mean. I didn't like that you were holding me accountable. I thought that everything you were saying was like all these rules. And I'm like, isn't Christians supposed to just like love on me? But I realized actually you were enforcing what I needed to get the pieces together and get somewhere healthy. So again, grace is not cheap. Grace isn't just let anything go. But you do have patience. You do have compassion as you coach someone towards what's healthy, towards what God wants for them, his best for them. So she saw that, came back later in a healthier state of mind and said, I had you all wrong. You actually challenged me because you loved me.
Well, thanks again to Kurt Pazdra, who is our homeless services director here at Rockford Rescue Mission. What a fascinating interview and a look into some of Kurt's background and also some of the things that motivate him in a pastoral sense as far as how they care for people here. So, Nathan, is there a word or two that stuck with you from this one that might encapsulate what you learned?
I think the big one was really always being prepared and just being coming into work with the idea that you always have to be, prepared just for ministry, since it's not, just a class that is ministry. It's walking in the hallway, saying hi to someone with a smile, and those small interactions that really show that hospitality and that grace and that love that you can just tell when people have it and when they don't. I've heard, peace talked about that way, where, people when have peace, there's nothing quite like when you have it. And when you're out of peace, or in an unpeaceful situation, there's nothing quite, not having it. So that's, I think, for me, what I'm going to, continually improve on and remember each day.
For me, it was when Kurt talked about making cultural connections to theological points or gospel points, where it may be a Taylor Swift song, or it may be a Vince Lombardi quote, or it may just be, a current movie or TV show or something. But to have the ability to be relevant to the culture and yet firm in faith and leading people in such a good direction, that's a real skill. And it's a skill that it's especially important at a place like this, just because people are coming out of rough experiences in the culture, but yet there's a lot of interesting things in the culture. And so you can connect those things, connect them to faith, and really make this a great experience for people and not a scary experience as they walk toward faith.
Yeah, and to church too. And we can connect them that can be a place where they can find peace.